Hello, I'm Teresa McDougall. I am one of the HAIL facilitators. Today we're going to talk about evidence-based decisions, specifically through data dialogues. Alignment with the HAIL principles, processes, and phases. It's important to lay a foundation around the core 4 principles. Being positive around growth mindset, appreciative lens, what can we do and what can we almost do? Same with what are the students doing, what can they do well, and what can they almost do? Looking at those growth edges, looking for strengths-based instead of deficit-based model. And we move into evidence-based decisions. We use collaborative inquiry and progress monitoring to look at our multiple points of data, our leading and lagging indicators. But we need to make sure that we build a system for capacity. What's that organizational learning that needs to be set up? Do we have reflective practice? Do we have double loop questioning as a part of our practice? What systems and thinking and alignment processes might we need to consider to ensure that we're successful in using evidence-based decisions? And most of all, we want to develop that collective ownership, distributed leadership, shared responsibility for all that we do in our school. Build that social trust and interdependence in order to have a collaborative culture. The school renewal aligned process and deliverables. The data dialogues conversation today is going to specifically focus on student data. And we're going to look at phases 3 and 4. You're going to start by looking at student growth edges and growth targets based on their academic and behavioral success. And then from there, we're going to, through our conversations, identify student priority growth targets and help you create a plan. The other 2 phases are very much dependent upon your student data, and you will learn more about that in other modules. Evidence-based decisions through data dialogues is a collective ownership of the school's learning climate and culture. They have the greatest chance at success. Data dialogue protocols provide a structure for reviewing, analyzing, and using student data to make evidence-based decisions at the school and classroom level. These dialogues will identify strengths and growth edges for students, classrooms, and leadership. You're looking for those growth edges, not the growth gaps. Resources to download and use. If you haven't already done so, the Data Dialogue Protocols for Facilitators, that is a document that I've used with numerous schools when we initially start this process. It's a way to support your conversations, and it also gives you a structure and protocols to follow to create that culture of conversation. The HAIL principles and phases is just there in case you want to download those and refer to them later. And the Michigan Data Dialogue Guide is on the Michigan Department of Education website. That is just there in case you want to go deeper and understand some of the other background moves as a facilitator. And then be sure you have access to NWA reports and online tools. For today, you're going to need the classroom report. So at any time you need to pause this video to do some of these activities, please do so. Learning outcomes. Participants will learn and be able to identify systems needed to create a culture of analyzing data, explore and use protocols and resources to enhance using data, and to be able to facilitate data dialogues with staff following the protocols. We're going to stay very focused. We're going to stay at a foundational level and trust your teacher leaders to take you to that next level when they're ready. Engage. In what ways are all stakeholders, staff, and students using data to make evidence-based decisions to increase student achievement? You may pause the video and take 1 minute to list the opportunities and ways they are using data. Now hold on to that and look for opportunities that may come up that you're thinking, you know what, this is an area we can either grow or we need to develop. Creating the system, create your plan ahead of time. Identify dates to hold grade level data dialogue conversations, identify dates and times for progress monitoring dialogues, and identify dates and times to work with leadership team prior to every date to build their capacity to understand intended outcomes. I'm going to help you walk through this initial plan. Other considerations when you're creating your timeline is when are your benchmarks and screeners data already collected in your school? You're going to need about 1.5 to 3 hours for each grade level for data dialogues 1 week later after you collected that data. Prepare your data walls. And again, I'll share some examples. Prepare teacher and classroom reports. This provides that common set of data for the dialogues. And create data dialogue toolkit, highlighters, sticky notes, pens, marker. And again, I will share some of what that might look like. Provide chart paper, post your student growth goals, if identified, to keep the focus to ensure students are increasing proficiency. And provide copies of the student SMART goal form that is included in your packet. So example timeline. You're going to pause the video to create your drafted timeline. I want you just to sketch out the months of the year. If you're reading and listening to this video mid-year, then start where you are. Map out the time that you have. When might you start to plant the seeds for these dialogues? Notice that I've included the benchmark times. Benchmark assessments are usually done in September, January, April/May. Plan when you're going to have the dialogues, usually a week or two later. When might you meet with teacher leaders? And again, this is a sketch. You may not have those exact dates at this time, but this will help you start to plan when might this work happen. And then your staff meetings are going to be a way that you can progress monitor and start to allow your teachers to learn the process and the way they go. There's also grade level team meetings or your PLCs. When might those occur? Make sure that you're aligning all of the opportunities for teachers to have conversations. Collective ownership. Who is analyzing the data? In what ways do all stakeholders have an opportunity to analyze their data? Look for patterns and trends, identify strengths and growth areas. In many schools that I've worked with, there's a small team of teachers or the principal leader is doing all of this analysis, and they're pulling the data right from the reports and recreating another report. But when you do that, you take away the thinking and analyzing, processing part of this work. You really want to develop that collective ownership. Help your teachers build the capacity and the habit of thinking of using data to really make instructional decisions. In what ways have they been given time to create a plan using the data to make instructional decisions? What I find is that, okay, so they give teachers an opportunity to look at their data, but teachers don't have the time to really analyze this data and make instructional decisions or determine what might they need to do in their classroom, either for core instruction or small group instruction. This is that learning zone. Help your teachers have time to really collaboratively think about how might we meet the needs of our students? What adjustments might need to be made? And then in what ways are staff given the opportunity to share the ownership of the student data? Share the ownership. So many times we want to be protective of our student data, but in what way are we given an opportunity to really create that culture of shared ownership? So stop, reflect, and share. Are your group's visions and goals clear to all? What are we doing this for? What's our why? How are we going to use this data? What are some things that keep your group focused? Are there strategies you might need to incorporate to help everybody, even yourself, to stay focused around your goals? And what are some ways you handle distractions? Are there ways that you get people back to that third point of reference? Is there a way that you can get them back to the data and the evidence to make those decisions? So keeping the focus and sharing the vision. So a strategy that has evolved over time. We've started actually mapping out our year on a whiteboard so that everybody sees the plan. And in fact, on the same whiteboard, it has developed in our last March staff meeting after some new learning. The staff in grade level teams identified what their implementation plan was and what the evidence of that work would look like. So they start filling out this plan. So no longer does the principal have to own this or even just the teacher leadership team. Collectively, all of the teachers are identifying their next steps. And you'll notice on the anchor chart, at the beginning of the year, when we identify our growth edges, our classroom practice growth edges, create a systematic way for teachers to use and analyze student data to make ongoing instructional decisions for core and flexible groupings. We put these charts around the library, and we do a carousel, and teams walk around, and together they discuss what is their existing state, and then using research evidence-based practices such as the essential literacy practices, they look at the desired state. So what does research say that we should be doing in this area? And that comes with us to every staff meeting, or it's in the background, so that teachers are constantly reminded of the why. This is our goal. This is why we're doing this work, is to achieve success in this area. And then we always have an anchor chart. This is what our data dialogue notes are going to look like. And quite honestly, that has evolved over time. And it's so exciting to see how these leadership teams are really taking it to that next level. So where to begin? Create a space for the data dialogue. You need to make sure that there's space and tables is set up for that collaborative conversation. Provide a data wall for teachers to organize their students. I have tried this with many staff, either having it digitally or in a file folder, but success comes when it's made visual, when it's made public. So those data walls on a whiteboard that's movable is so valuable. For over 15, 20 years, I've been doing this with staff, and it's the data wall that builds that collective ownership. Provide common data reports for each teacher to focus on one subject at a time. When they get really comfortable and have built that capacity around, say, reading, then move on and add math. And you will know when teachers are ready to add another subject area. And have the highlighters, chart markers, and sticky notes, et cetera, available. Make that ahead of time so that all of your tools are in one spot. The left-hand side, you will see the little toolkit. I have this available. I create a little data dialogue protocol folder for each of my teacher leaders. I want to build their capacity and habit of thinking. They have gone to making copies even for the rest of their colleagues at their grade level or content areas, so that everyone sees that there's a protocol to make sure that we're thinking about data in the same way. That SMART goal form is a form that one of my teacher leadership teams actually developed. It was so exciting when we talked about, so how do we identify a growth goal or growth target for our students? How are we going to make that plan and make sure that we're very focused? And then tie in some of our school goals at the bottom and see how teachers are going to make that connection. And they created this SMART goal form. And every team after that has used that same form. They have not changed a thing. And I feel that that's so powerful because they collectively have taken ownership of that. The chart paper and laptops are important because you want them to be able to dig into those other tools and resources within NWEA. And then when we initially start our data boards, this is what they look like. We align the proficiency rates according to NWEA. And then we start to have conversation around, so what does that look like in our district? K3, we have our IRIPs. If 61% and below are considered on IRIPs, maybe we change those percentiles. But this is a place to start. Let the teachers make the boards their own. So when you're looking at your data sets, make sure you understand clearly, and your teachers all understand clearly, the difference between the data sets. Our end of year assessments are based on end of year expectations. It's the standard by the end of the year. Benchmark data is where are they at this time based on the end of year goal. And then that strategic planning is based on all that data. How do we really help the students prepare and develop that level of proficiency by the end of the year? We're looking at what can they almost do in developing those skills. What are those other data sources you might have? What might be some areas to develop? I walk this through with all of my teams. I have you go through and highlight what are you currently using? And then it will help you identify what other sources you might need to develop to help teachers have a way to progress monitor or really truly evaluate what skills and strategies the students might need. You may pause the video now to do that. So for each data dialogue session, I have teacher teams create a chart with their notes. These charts will be displayed at each of the following data dialogue sessions for staff to reflect on the progress. I want them to remember what their growth goals were so that they can reflect on, have we made progress towards those goals yet? If we have, then let's celebrate. Let's talk about what our next step is. If we haven't, let's talk about what adjustments might need to be made. So we look at grade level patterns first, and then we look at what are some strengths as a grade level and what are some growth areas. And we develop that curriculum goal together. We try to find common areas. We look at small group patterns. So let's look at our classroom level strengths and growth areas. Do we have a group of students who share that common growth area? And then we create that SMART goal. And classroom instructional practices then is aligned to that small group pattern. In many cases, many schools have already identified some of those strategies, such as using data to make instructional decisions. And then they say, so what strategies might need to be in place to do that? Small group instruction or questioning. So examples of grade level data dialogue notes from fall to winter. As you see, there is a progression in level of thinking from students, or I'm sorry, from teachers. And this we celebrate too, right? We want to make sure that we honor where they were in the fall to where they go in the winter. And then you'll notice the one on the far right, we just started putting in our classroom practice goals. What did we identify as a building are going to be our strategies? And now we ask teachers to specifically identify, so what will you do around those classroom practice goals? How will we know we're successful? And then that goes into our implementation plan. And again, these then will follow up in the spring. And when we have our data dialogues at the end of the year, teachers will reflect on this winter data dialogue notes and identify successes, and then what might be some growth areas. And those growth areas will feed into next year's planning for our next year's teachers. So for instance, fourth grade will look at what third grade identifies, and then know that they may need to already plan more intentionally around informational text key ideas and details, for example, when they kick off the year. Levels of learning. I gave you some clear examples on the levels of learning for teachers as they go through this process. Every time they go through this process, their thinking is going to get more deeper, and they're going to have that level of analysis of really identifying what it is students need to know and understand to be able to do. And more importantly, what can they do? And then how do we adjust instruction from there? Honor where they are. Start to nudge them to that next level. And that's where your progress monitoring conversations during your staff meetings, you can start to raise that level of thinking. Facilitating. So this is where we get into the meat of this conversation. Hold to the norms. Really make sure you identify norms of collaboration with your teacher leadership team, and identify what are those behaviors all of us are going to focus on to be successful. Make sure you just trust the process. By holding to the guiding questions in front of you and your teacher leaders, the other colleagues are going to know that you have a process. They're going to understand that everyone's going to have an opportunity to really think through this process. Value and balance all voices and ideas, but yet keep the conversations focused and moving. So your teacher leaders may need some strategies on how to do that. Assume nothing. And that's what I tell the teachers. When we start this process, we are all building a common foundation of looking and thinking about data. We want to build that habit of using data. So seek for clarification and to understand. So one of the things I find is teachers and principal leaders are saying, oh, we've been doing data dialogues. We've got that. Well, assume nothing. Teachers may know how to look at their initial data, but many 99%, I continuously hear, but I really don't know how to use it in my classroom. I don't know how to make it authentic and real. So don't assume anything, but make sure when you're asking questions that you're seeking for clarification so that you can gain a deeper understanding of what is it that teachers need to know and understand, and what can they do with it. So activating and engaging the conversation. This first phase is to prepare the participants to look at what is often difficult data when you think of your end of year data. This process, you're getting the participants' predictions and assumptions, and then you record them on a chart paper. The aim is to simply understand these predictions and assumptions, but not to come to any agreement about the predictions offered. This is best done with the state assessment data or before staff has looked at benchmark assessment data. What I often find is because they've been looking at data in the past, teachers will have already pulled their data. So the predictions aren't as easy to have this conversation at this point. So remind staff of the focus and intentions of the data dialogues. What is the why? And what will we do with this data? Be clear and keep it simple the first time around. You really want to develop that habit of thinking and get them to understand growth edges. So you're looking at strengths of their data and what are those growth edges, period. So the purpose of this phase is to look specifically at your data without rationale or assumptions. So you're going to print off your NWEA grade level report, and I prefer the classroom report when you're having teachers look at their own classroom data. There's only so far they can do with the grade level data. They want to see, so what does it mean for me? So print out those classroom reports now. Now we're starting into the data dialogues. You've agreed on some working norms with your teachers. I work through this process with my teacher leaders first, really get them to understand and value the process, and they will give some insight on what they're noticing, and they will be able to help their colleagues get to that next level of conversation sooner than as if this was the first time for them as well. So look at the common benchmark data first. Our goal in this first phase is to identify students' strengths and growth areas as a classroom and grade level to determine a curriculum goal. And then grade level growth goals and targets. So what I often find is that we skip the core instruction piece and jump right into small groups or intervention groups. We need to consider our core instruction. And next part of this phase will be to identify a focus group of students with similar growth areas to develop growth goals and growth targets, period. This is our plan for today. So when you look at your report, what information do you gain from this page of the report? What questions might you have? I give a moment for teachers to share some of their thinking, some of their noticings, and then some of their wonderings. I then start to guide them on how to read the reports. Again, assume nothing. Keep it simple, don't overwhelm them, but share, like for instance, if you look at the orange area in the middle shows you how many students performed at the 21st to 40th percentile. There are 7, which is 33% of your class. And then you look over to the overall performance, and you can start to understand those bar graphs more clearly. If you look at this report, how many students are considered proficient? Proficient is 61st percentile and above. This classroom has 5 students who are considered proficient at this time. They are predicted to be proficient on your end of year assessment. How many students are partially proficient? So then we start to look through the appreciative ones. What are some strength areas for the students? So I asked the teachers to look at their grade level, or their classroom level. What appear to be strength areas for your students? I then have them share in a round robin style, each classroom teacher share the strengths of their classroom. They come to a consensus on what might be a common strength for their grade level. They put it on their poster. Then they're ready to move into which appear to be growth areas. This conversation becomes a little bit more challenging because they want to know, so what does that mean? Well, we are looking at data, so there is an exact science to that, but there is not a right or wrong answer. What we want to help the teachers is to see is that if we move some partially proficient students to proficient in these areas, think about how many more students will be proficient on the end of year assessment. In this case, there would be 6 more. But if you look, Specifically, at the middle one, where it's literature, craft, and structure, there are 7 students who are partially proficient. If they could move 7 more students in that area, they'll have that many more students who are proficient. And oh, by the way, if you teach some of those transfer skills from literature into informational text, key ideas and details, look how many more students you grab. I have the teachers identify what they might consider their growth area, and again, share round robin style. Come to a consensus if you can. What are some common patterns? And then put that on the chart. This is what their chart may look like as they're capturing their data. And then they start to drill down a little bit further and say, so what is our classroom practice goal? So for a small group, what are we going to focus on? Questioning. What are some ways or some questions that we might use, or ways that we might use questioning to help identify or develop these skills? Now, again, we're still kind of at the surface level. It's not as detailed as we'd like, but that's where teachers say, we don't have enough information yet. So organizing and integrating, the focus of the discussion transitions to problem solving, but collaboratively. It's not about looking at the deficit. It's like together we're looking at opportunities for student learning. First, you need to organize and visualize the data. So we've looked at the reports. Now we're going to make it visual. We need to look at how many students are above or below the 60th percentile. Now you can identify the 61st percentile, or I've had schools even raise that bar and say 65th percentile, but have the teachers highlight those students. You may pause and do that now. We are looking at percentile because those ranges are consistent data points for all of us. The RIT ranges are valuable, but they change depending on the time of year and grade level, and teachers constantly need to refer to a report. But percentiles are easy to translate to those end of year assessments. And it's also a way that most buildings are looking at report carding when we're saying how much do the students know at this time. So look at the levels of proficiency. Each student's name is on a magnet. This is done ahead of time for prepping. Teachers place each student in the appropriate column according to their level of proficiency by percentile, and then teachers may decide how to group or organize students within each column as they share their thinking within their grade level teams. So this is what it might look like initially after they've placed the students. I ask them to step back and have a balcony view and say, what do you notice about the distribution of student proficiency? And then they start to have conversations as a grade level about what they notice. And then they start to look at even their own classroom. Now here you'll notice that there are different colors. We have teachers highlight their names so that as a classroom, you can quickly identify your own classroom. But when you step back, it's not as detailed. So now this is where we start to really collectively own the student data. And it gets teachers out of their comfort zone to be able to just appreciate, this is where my class is. Now everyone else can appreciate where my class is and maybe help me move the students to their next level of proficiency. You'll also see in these columns that this teacher team decided to break down each column even further, because a student functioning right now to 40th percentile is different than at the 60th percentile. So they really wanted to make sure that they started to identify who those students are, and then what level of proficiency are they, what are those skills that they need to work on in order to move them to that next level, and to help them become better readers. So the use of the NWA tools and resources, student profile, learning continuum, and other reports as needed by teachers. So now we're getting into developing that growth plan. They've identified a small group of students who have what appear to be a common growth area, but now we need to really drill down and say, but are they at the same level? So go ahead and log into the website, click on growth reports, scroll down to student profile and click on it. You're going to select in the drop-down bar the term rostered, then work your way down to identify the specific data you want to look at. So the reading tab, what information can you learn about students from this view? So let's look at this particular student. the instructional areas. It even tells you that there's a suggested area of focus. So if you click on that, it's going to take you to this screen. What is really cool is that you can go to the left-hand side and click on standard instead of topic. And on the right-hand side, there's reinforce, develop, or introduce. For our purposes, we look at develop because that's the growth area. It's not new, it's just an area that if we could ensure that the students are able to automatically and readily use these skills and strategies, they're ready for that new learning. So, which standard does your student need to develop? What level is the student proficient at this time? What skill might the student need to be taught? So be sure to scroll down and view all the standards assessed, and this might provide areas that might be gaps or appear to be gaps in the learning. Remember, we're looking at those growth edges, but if you drill down to the standard level and you look as a fourth grader, they're proficient at a first grade level in a particular area, that is the gap. That may need to be filled, but we want to make sure that we're building up the strength areas or the growth areas for this student. Once you've done that with a couple of your students and you start to put some notes on a piece of paper and grouping your students according to those next level skills that they need, go to the learning continuum to identify other students working at the same skill level. This will help you to start to group your students, and then you may toggle between students in the right-hand corner when you're in that student profile. This is an area that I give teachers plenty of time to explore. For many of them, they've not seen this new feature that NWA has added the last few years. So you may pause the video to go ahead and explore that for yourself as well. So now you've identified your students. You may have even identified the next level of skills that these students need, and you've developed those gap areas that you might need to fill in order for the student to be able to move on to that next level. By using these tools and resources, again, you may start to identify what are those next steps. You're going to start to identify a growth goal and a growth target for these students. We're going to create this growth plan, and then how will we know when they're meeting those benchmarks, that progress monitoring. So this is your time to work together, create a plan, create a goal based on the student growth area. I really like this first time for teachers to really focus on the standards, because we seem to have moved away from standards and become resource-based instead of standard-based. So create your growth goal around a standard first, and then identify the skills or strategies, thinking processes that the students might need in order to meet proficiency. So that becomes, what is your instructional plan for them? How will you know when students are making growth? And you know what, more importantly, how will the students know? What's that success criteria for this identified focus group? I really start out with just one group at a time to really help the teachers build their own capacity in doing this process really well with one group of students. It seems to relieve the teachers of that extra stress, saying, oh, okay, so I can identify 3 to 7 students and really practice this. And you're giving them permission to slow down. They're still going to meet with other groups of students, but if they can just practice with one group, then you might be able to add another group by the next time you have benchmark meetings. As a leadership team, identify how and when you will know teachers and students are successful. Add this to your calendar you sketched at the beginning. So during staff meetings, what are you going to expect them to bring at the next staff meeting? This is going to really generate conversations, and you're going to be able to use that ongoing real-time data from teachers to determine what they need as next level of learning. So this is where the teachers start to develop their plan. So who are the students? Who's the teacher? And they start to fill this out. This is a real collaborative effort, because they really want to have conversation around, so how are you going to move those students from partially proficient to proficient in this area? What area did you choose? Do you have enough data? Do I have enough data? What are you using for that? And so it really becomes a collective problem solving and solution gathering opportunities. And looking at what evidence we use to monitor student progress is really, really important. What real-time and ongoing data? Essential number 9, which is the use of ongoing and observable data, really gives teachers to have permission to use conversation, to use that reader behavior checklist. That's where you go back to what are the other data sources you're collecting and help teachers identify all of the opportunities that they can use to monitor student progress. And what might your students need to be successful? Think about those processes and systems. How often will you need to meet with these groups of students? How might you get students to own this goal and progress monitoring? Some of these you might just plant seeds at this time, depending on teacher feedback and what you're noticing in their conversations. The next step might be for students to own this goal and help them identify a progress monitoring or the behaviors that they need to implement to be successful. So your next phase of work is looking at what classroom practices, evidence-based practices, are going to help students increase their level of achievement, whether it's core instruction. I have some schools that I've identified a classroom instructional practice is moving and using their resource more effectively, making informed decisions based on their student data. Or it could be small group instruction. It could be data-driven instruction. It may be essential number 4 and 5, where it's interactive read alouds and being intentional about the types of questions we're asking that's around key ideas and details. So these classroom practice goals should align to the strategies already identified by the staff or leadership team. You want to help stay focused. And you're going to identify vital behaviors and measures and benchmarks. And again, this is the next level of work. You will have other modules to help develop those plans. You'll also use that data then to identify what's that leadership and support. What are those growth edges for us to create the sustainable system? Everything needs to be tied back to our student data. What are those school conditions we need to put in place to help all of us be successful? Next steps in using this real-time data. What is recorded in the charts as curriculum goals, student growth areas, and classroom practice should lead us to, as I said before, identifying leadership goals, professional learning goals, creating a gold standard of this implemented practice, and creating an implementation and monitoring plan. These are all critical stages for success. So what impact might data dialogues processes have in your school? What impact might this process have across your school in different grade levels and/or roles? What did you learn today that you are taking back to your school to implement tomorrow? In order to be successful, you need to really consider what systems do we have in place to create a sustainable culture of analyzing and using data to make instructional decisions? What are those systems we might need to plan for? That's why we started sketching out a plan so that you can really look at what do you already have in place? What might we need to put in place and where do we start? What data are we collecting? When, why, and how are we using it? I have had some schools that have put a halt to collecting all the other data to say, what are all these data sources and how are we really using it to make instructional decisions? Are we using it to make instructional decisions? Is it changing the way we inform and guide our decision making? And in what ways are we using data to make evidence-based decisions to increase student achievement? That's the ultimate goal, is increasing student achievement, student proficiency. And to do that, we need to focus on our teachers and build their capacity. And we do that through shared leadership and distributed and collective ownership. Thank you. We value your feedback and invite you to reflect on your learning time together. Please visit the link here and to complete a short Google form. Thank you. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us.